I waited for months after Natlan's release just in case more people realize this, but since no one is really talking about it, let me just bring this up to y'all Star Rail and Genshin lore enjoyers real quick. When I say the term phlogiston, which one do you guys think of? The lava-like element that comes from Natlan, or the seemingly plain and ordinary crafting material that exists in Honkai Star Rail? To my surprise, some people said that they either haven't noticed it or they just realized it very recently, and when I thought about it again, well, you'd be forgiven in thinking that this seemingly random item serves no purpose, particularly because of how, well, insignificant phlogiston itself looks like, particularly in Star Rail. You can literally get them from just breaking random barrels in Herta's space station and Belobog, they drop from random critters, and their uses are only limited to making random energy drinks, fried chicken for some reason, and robot buffing arms. But with more lore drop from Star Rail's relic set Scholar Lost in Erudition, and from Genshin's latest Natlan Archon quest, there is more significance to what it is that this material, or should I say, elemental energy, proves in regards to the existence of a scientific connection, at least in regards to Genshin and Star Rail's lore and world building, to more concrete evidence of the connection between those two universes. Before I carry on, of course, I'm going to put a spoiler alert for the Natlan Archon quest and some of Star Rail's Simulated Universe quests. Alright, let's get going with this. So, the biggest thing you all should take away from the existence of phlogiston is that this thing is the building block of everything elemental energy related in Teyvat. Described to be an advanced form of pyro and is what the heavenly principles use to create the elemental energies that we know and love, and was also the heavenly principles' way of better countering the abyss.
And phlogiston is Teyvat's primordial form of energy. The heavenly principles used phlogiston as a basis for the creation of elemental energy, to develop a power to better counter the abyss. Light refracts into 7 different colors, which we collectively refer to as a rainbow. Elemental energy is a similar concept. It's essentially the modern counterpart of phlogiston.
Basically, in terms of its existence in Genshin, there's really nothing else to dispute about. This element was practically the mother of all elemental energy in Teyvat, and considering the fact that the heavenly principles had to grab this intrinsically primordial source of power from somewhere, I'd say that the chances of this thing coming from somewhere not from Teyvat and, maybe from space or some other part of the outer universe of Genshin isn't something that would seem all that far-fetched to think about. The interesting part, however, is when we consider what this element's existence might mean when it comes to Star Rail's universe. Of course, it is much simpler to just look at the first line of the item's description, which says, "Particles that form the flame." Say that, oh, this thing exists in all things combustible and is basically like the oxygen of Star Rail's world. And since it exists as something of similar nature in Genshin, being the building block of a certain scientific existence, which are the elements, you can make that line of connection, call it a day, and, well, you wouldn't exactly be wrong. Because in our very real life, phlogiston was actually a real scientific concept that was proposed by German scientist Johann Becher and finalized by Jörg Stahl, who described phlogiston as the element that things turn into when combustible elements, well, combust. Basically, from what I got, this was oxygen before oxygen became a thing. And if I sound like I'm talking out of my ass, well, I probably am, since I haven't learned a lick of science since middle school, and I can only read what Wikipedia and Google have given to me, so But essentially, this principle is what the first line of its item description takes inspiration from, and instead of leaving it be as a disproved scientific theory, Star Rail just went ahead and made it their scientific lore. One man's trash is truly another man's treasure. But the really interesting part of this is the rest of its item's description, which not only brings up the infamous Lord of Silence Genius Society member number 4, Polka Kakamon, but it also brings up the notion that this one element might have been directly connected in a series of events which led to the death of not 1, not 2, but 3 other Genius Society members. Those members being Genius Society members numbered 7, 8, and 9. Who are respectively named Bogdan, Lambda, and Klein. You heard that right, some names that are completely different from the other 2 that were mentioned in the phlogiston item description, which was Genius Society member number 2, Harold Punch, who initially discovered the concept of phlogiston before being countered by Nyol Iman, who was then countered again by Bogdan. Kinda like in real life the way Becher and Stahl was countered by Priestley and Lavoisier, who then discovered oxygen. Anyway, All three of the aforementioned society members were leading members of their scientific field that focuses on energy analysis, with phlogiston being the center point of their research. There's a bit of a complicated love story that also became the building block to the lore between these three, because Bohdan and Lambda married and remarried one another a total of 4 times, and through Klein's secret notes and the lore of the Scholar's Boots, it seems to be evident that the guy had some sort of unrequited love for Lambda and maybe tried to orchestrate some things to make it so that Lambda divorces Bohdan for good and then maybe hook up with him, and it was clear that the guy had some sort of obsession with her as well, seeing as a bunch of her stuff was actually found at the basement of his place, but I don't know. The point is, these three were tight. However, it was when Lambda discovered an underground polar energy source, which was then discovered to be phlogiston, that shit began to really hit the fan. First, Bohdan reported that someone tried to injure Lambda's already disabled right hand, damaging a part of its exoskeleton as an aftermath. But then 2 weeks later, an explosion in that same polar research center killed Lambda, and the investigators officially chalked it up as an accident caused by improper operation. But they realized that Klein might have something to do with it and that there's potentially a bigger plot behind Lambda's death. However, it looks like before they were able to get any more information, Klein himself was found dead. They didn't tell us how, and not a while later, Bohdan was also killed in his lab after solidifying the discovery of phlogiston. While evidence suggested that he was killed by this element called gray seal gold pellets that came into contact with a lot of phlogiston, which ended up heating his heart out since it was inside his jacket pocket, the investigator notes suggest that there was once again more than meets the eye. In the end, the phlogiston item description was the only thing that confirmed that Bohdan had indeed been killed by Polka Kakamon, which immediately corroborates Klein's suspicions that Polka might have been the one to kill Lambda as well. However, it seems that before he was able to say anything to Bohdan, Klein himself had been killed, seeing as the recording that was found in his place ended with what we can only presume to be scratched out tape noises. Basically, what we can surmise is that both Lambda and Bohdan had been killed due to their connections with how phlogiston is being discovered and analyzed, while Klein had most likely been killed because he suspected Polka to have been behind the murder of Lambda, presumably got too close, seeing as the last point of his secret notes marks a point of his realization that Polka Kakamon was still alive and he was finally offed by her in order to maintain secrecy. Because 2 holes in this story is that we don't know how Klein died, and the other one is that we don't have any other lore piece other than the phlogiston item description, which tells us how it is that people officially discovered that Polka had been the one to kill Bohdan. Moreover, through the simulated universe quest Antinomic Waltz, we also discovered that there's a concept in Star Rail called the Circle of Knowledge, a concept explained by Polka herself that implies that Nous, the Aeon of Erudition, instigated that concept to categorize everything in the universe that can be fully determinable and calculated, all while also insinuating that everything which exists or is created that goes beyond the calculations of the Circle of Knowledge must be destroyed. All of this is to say that Polka, and I guess you can call it as Nous's will or something like that, wasn't about to let the Genius members understand the true nature of phlogiston, and that it was imperative that such knowledge remains out and away from their hands. Because with the death of all 3 of those Genius members, the research in those energy waves they were looking at and phlogiston in such a depth itself would have most likely come to a halt. Losing one of them would have probably done it, but losing all 3 probably ceased any further research from anyone else. However, it might also explain why when Ron May tried to literally revive Lambda and seemingly succeeded for a little bit, Lambda did nothing but apparently smile and then disappeared into thin air. Apart romantically, maybe because she saw no reason to actually be revived and live, and a theoretical part being that if Ron May had actually managed to extract any sort of knowledge from her, then Ron May might have just bought herself a one-way ticket to landing within the crosshairs of the Lord of Silence herself. That being said, not that Ron May can't do that through any other means. She's been doing a whole lot of shady stuff by herself. But hey, at least she revived Tingyun, so forgiven? This shows that phlogiston has the potential to play such a big part as Star Rail's own form of elemental energy. Considering the capabilities of the element in Genshin's universe, who's to say that the one in Star Rail can't achieve the same thing? Surely the ability to create and fracture elements like the way the heavenly principles have utilized it would be something that even the Eons wouldn't be able to ignore. In any case, I think we will go down a story path in the future that involves seeing Phlogiston in its true form. Because with the fact that we are getting more and more Genius Society members being teased at us, and now that we actually have Herta in her true 5-star form, seeing as she is the emanator of erudition and all that, I think there's more to see from this element. And who knows, maybe we'll get to see the element act a bit more like how we see it in Genshin, and they can use that as a way to create some sort of crossover event. Who knows? Anyway, thank you for watching. Feel free to leave a like and leave your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want, you can give my Twitch channel a follow as well. I promise you, I will start streaming soon. Until the next video, my name's Leafy, and I'll see y'all next time. Sayonara.